first, the push to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. I know the arguments have been heard. What do you expect the outcome to be in that particular case, which would obviously nullify what Colorado has just done and Illinois and Maine?
Yeah. So first of all, Sarah, I'm expecting this opinion to come down essentially imminently because Colorado's primary is this Tuesday. Yeah. Colorado is a Super Tuesday state. It's a little curious to me that they haven't released the opinion already. Admittedly, it's an expedited appeal. They had oral argument just a few weeks ago. But all signs are pointing towards this opinion probably coming out tomorrow. So within the next 24 hours, frankly, if I had to guess. It's going to be an 8-1 or 9-0 case. You know, even at oral argument, you saw Justices Elena Kagan and even Ketanji Brown Jackson, who were deeply skeptical of Colorado's arguments. Really, the only question for me is whether Sonia Sotomayor really wants to solidify her resistance street cred and her, far left bona fides by issuing a heroic to the MSNBC crowd solo dissent. But this is going to be a very straightforward case. Trump is going to be on the ballot. There are at least 5 different reasons why Colorado's argument does not hold water. It's going to be an easy decision for the court.
Yeah, I felt that way as well when, obviously you are much more of a legal expert than me. I'm not at all. But even me, just a commoner listening to, people like, as you point out, Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson, like asking actual tough questions to these attorneys arguing for Colorado. I'm like, boy, when you've lost Ketanji Brown Jackson, it is not looking good for you. So I hope that is the case. So, okay, so let's move over to the presidential immunity case, which is a little bit more nuanced. What's your gut telling you about that case?
Yeah, so this is a very complicated case, both on the substantive constitutional law as well as what lawyers call the procedural posture. The procedure is kind of complicated as well. So this is what we call an interlocutory appeal. This is not the actual case. The actual case, obviously, is Jack Smith's case about the 2020 election and January 6th. But they have to decide this issue first because it is a necessary threshold question before even getting to the merits there. Now, procedurally speaking, on Wednesday, what the Supreme Court did was they took basically the middle ground view. So what Trump's lawyers really wanted in their ideal dream scenario, they would have issued a stay of the D.C. Circuit's denial of immunity while allowing the Trump team to seek review before the en banc full 11-judge D.C. Circuit, simply for purposes of slowing this down as much as possible, running up the clock. On the other hand, the best case scenario for Jack Smith would have been to just deny this stay, say that he has no immunity, and then the trial could start. So they took the middle ground approach where they're going to expedite this hearing on the merits. So looking at the actual merits on the actual Article 2 presidential powers constitutional question, I am probably about the most sympathetic of anyone in the legal commentariat to President Trump's claims, but I also tend to be a pro-Article 2, pro-presidential powers guy in general, so I can't be accused of inconsistency there. Looking at the current 9 justices, Sarah, I don't see it. I don't see the votes there for full absolute immunity. You probably have Clarence Thomas. You probably have Sam Alito, maybe Kavanaugh because he's also a pro-presidential powers guy. After that, hard to say. What I can see, and Jack Goldsmith, a Harvard law professor, had a really good tweet thread on this earlier today, is I could see kind of a mixed result whereby they basically say that some acts do have you fully immune from possible criminal prosecution, some acts don't. And then what that would do is then would kick it back down to the lower courts to go into a fact-finding mission to discern whether these acts were covered or not covered. That would be very good for the Trump team as well, because that again would just delay the process even more.
Yeah, I mean, I guess delaying the process to a certain point, but then what happens if, let's say, let's war game this out. Okay, so then What happens if they delay the process and let's say Donald Trump is elected president in November, and then could the trial still continue after that? Like, what happens then?
Look, we're in uncharted waters here, so I mean, to an extent, Sarah, your guess is as good as mine. Look, there are longstanding Department of Justice DOJ guidelines against perceived election interference. Believe it or not, I mean, the DOJ has plowed through a lot of these guidelines in recent years there. Yeah. But as you start to get closer and closer to November, I expect the pressure is going to build on special counsel Jack Smith to potentially drop this prosecution in its entirety. I'm not suggesting that he will do that, but historically speaking, and again, just historically, because we really do live in different times these days, the DOJ has tried as hard as it possibly could to avoid the perception, even the perception of meddling in elections. So if they're going based on if past is precedent, then they might even just abort this thing if it's getting really, really close to November. Again, I think we're living in different times. It's Trump. People lose their minds here, so I'm not predicting that. But if Trump wins the election in November, at that point, I assume the prosecution has to be dropped because Trump obviously would just go ahead and pardon himself for the federal crimes there. He can't necessarily pardon himself for state crimes. That's a little more complicated. But the federal crimes, he can just clearly and easily and cleanly pardon himself. So if he does win in November and Jack Smith has avoided these DOJ guidelines, I think the case is probably dropped at that point.
So let me ask you this then, Josh. Would you agree, because I don't want to put words in your mouth here, would you agree that all of the indictments, all of the cases against Donald Trump are baseless, a baseless weaponization of the justice system, of the judicial system against Donald Trump? Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I do. I think, but Sarah, looking at what's happening right now in our country, you cannot look at this as good faith prosecution. Right. You cannot look at this as a good faith use of the rule of law in general, not just prosecutions. I mean, Trump's facing these ridiculous civil lawsuits as well. The fraud case, the $454 million, including interest payments, this $83.3 million, including punitive damages, and E. Jean Carroll, which, by the way, was E. Jean Carroll's second shot at the apple. She had a previous settlement for $5 million. How much money can this woman's reputation possibly be worth, according to New York State jury? So looking at all the above, you kind of have to zoom out here. Yes, this is absolutely an unprecedented lawfare prosecution, but the D.C. case for Jack Smith and the Georgia case with Fani Willis are the most absolute dangerous of all of them to me, because those really do involve core political speech. Now, you can say that Donald Trump and his co-defendants, his allies, people in his administration, his campaign, whatever, you can say that they were lying about the 2020 presidential election. But here's the key point, Sarah. Even conceding for the sake of arguments here that they were lying, which I'm not necessarily going to concede, but even conceding that hypothetically, you are allowed to lie in this country. It is not a crime to lie, except in very limited circumstances, the Stolen Valor Act, and some very limited exceptions. But generally speaking, to try to criminalize and prosecute someone for lying, even again, conceding for the sake of argument that it was a lie, that is a really dangerous precedent to set here.
So you brought up Fani Willis. Now I know you called her Fani, and that's how she prefers to be called. I don't want to make her too fancy, so I call her Fani. But how does this play out for her? Because I'm watching all of this, and I'm like, there's no way this woman gets away with all of this. All these misconduct hearings. I mean, we're seeing text messages now of Nathan Wade, her boyfriend's friend, who's like, yeah, they've been doing this a really long time. I mean, she seems really sunk. But then I think to myself, well, I don't know that I trust anything these days, because I see how the justice system, I should say the judicial system now, because I don't think I can call it the justice system anymore. I see this two-tiered judicial system, and I see how they can weaponize against one subset of society and not the other. And then I'm like, I don't know. But the judge seems to be pretty impartial. So how do you see the Fani Willis thing playing out?
Yeah, I thought that the way that Judge Scott McAfee comported himself, the way that he acted back when Fani testified earlier this month, was very neutral. In fact, I mean, he was very much kind of just giving the witness the rope with which to hang herself. Yeah. That was frankly kind of how I viewed his conduct, which was very hands off. And she sounded like an absolutely crazy and frankly just really dumb person. I mean, openly wondering what continent Belize is in. I mean, the Bahamas, I think she was questioning. But, this cell phone geolocator investigator, which Trump and his co-defendants, the lawyers, retained, really damning stuff. I mean, unless that they can show that that is somehow all fabricated, thousands, tens of thousands of text messages and calls combined in that year 2021 before the November 2021 commencement of the prosecution. Sarah, if I'm putting on my prognosticator hat here, I don't see how this prosecution ultimately unfolds in Fulton County, Georgia. I think they're probably going to have to move it out of Fulton County, which, one, if that happens, will very much delay this prosecution, which by the way was on the current calendar is only going to start in August. So it'll be delayed even more.
Wow.
2, once you move out of Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is, you're going to be in a much purple or perhaps even a red jurisdiction, and the jury pool is going to reflect that. So Trump, I think, is looking very, very good in Georgia right now. The D.C. prosecution with Jack Smith, a bit of a mixed bag. We'll see what the Supreme Court does. But that is really where the Biden regime is putting all of the eggs in the basket right now. It's in that D.C. case. That's really the one to watch.
Well, Josh, I appreciate you coming on. And I know I always make a point to say I appreciate having someone much smarter than me come here and explain all of these, the process, especially when there's too many for me to keep up with. I'm like, 91 indictments, I can't keep up with that. I need Josh to come talk to me. So Josh, come back soon, okay?
Anytime, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
If you like this clip and you want to see the full episode, click here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, come on, you know you do. Click here.